You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we're chatting with Jessica Phillips, second clarinet and E-flat clarinet in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is a special episode for me because Jessica and I have been friends for years, so thanks for joining in.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So you've wrapped up your 18th season at the Met this year. The opera is such a unique place. Can you tell us about the scheduling and how you guys have your crazy tech week time and how you do rehearsals and have so many operas going at once all season long?
Oh, yeah. It's a little bit spreadsheet complicated, but we generally do 3 weeks of preseason before our season starts. So we come back Labor Day weekend, essentially. And then we do 3 weeks of all the operas that are going to start our season. And then any things that the music director is doing. We might do that more. And that's a way for us to just kind of get into shape and get back into music land and opera brain. And then there are usually anywhere between 3 and 4 operas a week. And then we start rehearsing what's going to happen several weeks down the road. So it can be anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 rehearsals a week, depending on what you're playing. And then whatever operas you're on in rotation.
Right. So many conductors are taking turns also conducting. Do you have rehearsal conductors that are conducting if you're rehearsing something and the real conductor's not there? How does that all work?
Generally not, because conductors only get maybe 3 or 4 rehearsals with us.
Wow.
So even, in the pit.
Right.
And then they might have 3 or 4 rehearsals with us without singers.
Okay.
So our schedule is so crazy. I mean, it's not like weeks and weeks of rehearsals.
Right.
We can have 6 rehearsals for Die Frau Ohne Schatten, and you're like, shove all the notes in your head.
It's incredible. And sometimes you'll play something and then like 3 weeks will go by and there's no scheduled performance and then one performance.
Yes. We did that this year with the Ring Cycle. We rehearsed Rheingold and Valkyrie and did it, and then it was like maybe 3 weeks later for the second and third cycle, and all of a sudden it was like Die Valkyrie, oh yeah, remember that? And
Right.
It was a little bit like, yeah, we're gonna play it how we play it. Right. We generally leave the conductor, he's all those things you told us in rehearsal, bye.
Yeah. Now we have to do what we know because there's no time.
I mean, I say that lovingly because Phillips Jordan just did our last Ring Cycle and he was really great. We'd really never worked with him, and so to do the Ring Cycle with a conductor you don't really have a relationship with, I mean, it just turned out to be really great. We had a nice burgeoning relationship and it really grew and blossomed. So that can happen too. After a month, all of a sudden it's just, it's in your body. And what will happen is everyone's a little bit more nervous and a little bit more willing to listen and be right on top of what's going on and present. So some amazing things can happen. The other thing that's interesting that happens with us is we'll get either a new cast with no rehearsal, or sometimes we'll get a new conductor with no rehearsal.
Wow.
So I remember speaking of Valkyrie, we did it with Lauren Mazel, and it was like, maybe 17 hours long. And then we did, Donald Ronicles came and did one performance. And like right from the opening, it was like, oh my God, this is just riveting. And afterwards, Anthony McGill and I just sat there going, what just happened? This was like one of the most incredible performances, just because you hadn't rehearsed, and it was every moment you're just riveted to like what's going to happen. Right. And it was really special. It was a really special performance. So really amazing things can happen in that unknown area. Of course, we generally don't like that because it is so much more anxiety and nervous making for that kind of situation. So.
And you do many of the same operas year after year, or they go into rotation. So there's definitely kind of like a family, this is how we do it, this is how we play. Yeah. When you're bringing in subs and, everything's rotating, do you have a certain amount of hours that you can play in a week? Or is it really just more complicated than that? And sometimes you work all day long, 2 days in a row, or do you try and give people breaks?
Well, so we're a union house, and that dictates many of the hour things that happen for us, which is great, because people can get hurt. So in terms of how many hours one can play, that's all dictated by like contract and breaks and things like that. In terms of, we do use a lot of subs. I mean, we do 7 performances a week, 2 on Saturday, and I'm technically contractually required to play 4 of them. So you can imagine that like there's going to be times when I'm not playing, and so there's a sub there, and the subs get paid exactly what we get paid to do that. Rehearsal hours are paid and things like that. So it's really a complex system of rotation.
Right.
But generally, the subs that we've been using for a long time. They know opera. I always feel bad because, and this has happened a lot recently, but an orchestra might get locked out and people want to hire those people. And it's like, well, do you know La Boheme? Not really. It's hard for us to bring in people who just don't know opera.
Right.
And you don't learn it in conservatories necessarily. And we do have a style of playing, which is pretty different. We have a style playing Rossini. It's short, it's light. We're very good at accompanying, and we can take rhythm with the singer pretty loosely, and therefore it's maybe not your technically in beat metronomically 4 beats at at 72. So because it's always fluid, singers are fluid. They take breaths. They want to do something with a consonant or a line. So you really have to know it. And
there's a great sensitivity to that.
Yeah, we listen all the time. So it's a little bit different in that respect. So yeah, we have certain things, but for example, we wouldn't rehearse all day long and then have a show at night. We're generally, our afternoons are open, and it depends. Each week is different. So it's not like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, something like that. It's Monday night, Wednesday night, rehearse all week and then play a double on Saturday.
It's fascinating. It's such a different life from the orchestral life, and it's kind of unknown.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not taught in conservatories really, and until you get there, you have no idea what you're in for.
Oh, yeah. It's almost better not knowing, because then it's like, whoa. I mean, I was talking about this with my colleague, Jim Onyebene, who's now retiring, and we always had this joke, because generally when I talk about him, I'm talking about a squeak or something that he's done. But I will say probably his first rehearsal, I think, was for Die Valkyrie, which has like amazing bass clarinet solos. And my first rehearsal was Wozzeck. Wow. And it was like,
This is scary.
So yeah, you kind of don't know, but there is some flexibility in what I pick. And so sometimes I might actually get a weekend off. On the other hand, I did my most epic double Saturday ever, where I played Götterdämmerung, which is just under 6 hours, and then I played Dialogue of the Carmelites, which is actually not that long, but it's a lot of long tones. And I literally could not touch my face for like 3 days afterwards. It was like,
Which, that's so incredible. Just the concentration alone. I feel like you guys get really just tuned into this hyper concentration that if you're not used to it, which is amazing that the subs also get used to it. It's really a different lifestyle.
Yeah. We have a lot of new wind players too. And I mean, I'm always so impressed, because I think I just felt completely clueless for the first 5 years. But some of our new players just are right there and, have a score and are really knowledgeable. So it's pretty incredible, the learning curve, but everybody has it with opera.
Right.
You can have played some of it and maybe you got an opportunity to do something somewhere. Right. But, the absolute concentration of things is pretty unusual in this country, I think, for all year long.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about your very beginning and kind of your journey through, because it's unique. And I love getting to have that opportunity to hear all the different ways that you can get to the goal. There's so many different ways of getting there. So for you were in Boston and you were in youth orchestra. And what was your journey through your first teachers and into college? And how did you make your college choices?
That's so great. That's such a great question. I tell my kids this too. Everybody has their own journey, and there is no right way. Yes, I moved. I had started clarinet in Colorado, and I went to an arts camp in New Jersey, and it was like, you can be in theater, you can do music, or you can do art. And for some reason, I wanted to do music. I just thought that would be really cool. And there are no musicians in my family, and I remember sitting on the front porch of my grandparents who lived in New Jersey near this camp, and I was pretty young. I think my grandparents were a little bit scandalized that my mom was willing to send me to like an overnight camp, in second grade. But I was trying to figure out what instrument I wanted to play. And my grandfather loved Benny Goodman. And I just remember where I was at the screened-in porch, and there are like fireflies in the summer, and we're just like, talking there. It's dark, and you can see all these little fireflies lighting up. And my grandfather's like, Benny Goodman, he plays the licorice stick. You got to do it. And I was like, yep, okay, great. I don't even know what that is. Like, I could not even envision what a clarinet was. If I had known it has so many stupid parts, I would have said no. But I did it, and I loved it, absolutely. Then I moved to Boston, outside of Boston, to Newton going into fifth grade, and got into a youth orchestra. And that's a whole nother long story. I think my karma is kind of like, I want something and I don't get it, but then I sort of get it. Eventually it works out. So I did eventually get into the youth orchestra. I was an alternate at first, and they invited their alternates to go to the camp for the summer. And I did not want to go because they didn't want me. But my brother was like, they're asking you to go as an alternate. So I did go, and I played Beethoven's First Symphony, and it was just like, unbelievable in heaven. I just was completely like, classical music is so amazing, and it was like a whole different world. And then I got to re-audition, and the conductor at the time was A.J. Owie.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I didn't hear anything. And so I just assumed I didn't get in. So like 3 weeks into the season, they're like, where is Jessica? They called. And my mom was like, well, she's an alternate. She didn't get in. And they're like, oh my God. It's like somebody just forgot to tell me that I had gotten in. And AG was like, where's that cute little fifth grader? I think I was in sixth grade at that point. But yeah, where's this cute little sixth grader?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And later on, Jonathan Kohler, who was a clarinet player in the community, was the assistant conductor. And he never lets me forget that I wore this peach dress with like a little lace doily collar. I was like so little. But yeah, I did. So then I got into this youth orchestra community, which was incredible. I mean, we played Mahler 2, and we did, Bartok Concerto for Orchestra and Lutoslawski and all this stuff. So I really learned to count and played a ton of rep in high school. And we lived around the corner from Al Genovese, who was the principal oboist in Boston Symphony. And he lived in Boston. If you know this, they have duplex houses, which it doesn't really exist anywhere else. It sounds super weird, but it's like that's kind of how it goes. And he lived in a house with Dick Mackey. So he was fourth horn in BSO. And I was in school with Brandon, who is Dick and Wendy's son. And he was a year older than me and played the French horn. And so it was like, oh, Jessica plays clarinet. Well, she's got to study with this person. And so they kind of really opened up my world in terms of you really need to get a teacher. So sophomore year, I began to study with Julie Vaverka, who had studied with Harold Wright. And so all of a sudden it was like, I remember my first lesson with her, and she was talking about making music in between the notes. And I was like, huh? Not D major scale.
Right.
I don't know what's happening. And it just, my whole world exploded. So I continued to study with her throughout the rest of high school. And when I started to look at colleges, I mean, Julie was such an amazing female mentor for me as well. She was just so professional, and she died several years ago, actually. But she had been subbing in BSO and was known around town. And Al was a very, good friend of hers, of course. And so she was well revered and really an incredible musician. And that's when I was like, oh, a musician, not a clarinet player.
Lifestyle,
right?
yeah.
And she had this like leather attaché case, and everything was in there, including mints. She was just so put together. And she played double lip.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And that was kind of like, wow. So there was just a lot of stuff. She put me on an etude book that Marcel Moïse did. And it was like, do, Saint-Saëns organ symphony excerpts and then do them in all different keys, because that was a Moïse thing to do. And it was like, whoa, you really hear very different things when you start to do that.
Right.
Transpose it up a step.
That's incredible. Mm-hmm. Did she ever encourage you to try double lip, or did she do
No.
that in the process? No?
Nope, she did not. It's interesting because that came later for me. Yeah. But that was my first experience with double lip. And yeah, I mean, when I started to look at colleges, I was auditioning. I auditioned for Kenny Grant, and I remember that audition like, oh my God, it was yesterday. He was like, keep playing the Mozart Concerto, and I was like, there's more after the exposition.
I only got the first 2 pages.
He's like, this will be fabulous, Oh gosh, that was a learning experience. But I had so much fun in high school with all my friends. We were all totally orchestra nerds and loved each other so much. And I just wasn't sure. And I came to New York. A lot of us wanted to be in New York. And we knew that like Columbia had a joint program with Juilliard, and little do we know it was like impossible. But there was a feeling, that there was going to be some sort of music there. And I went to Barnard to visit with my mom, and my mom was just like, this is it. And I was like, this is it. Wow. And I got in and I went there. It's the female college technically of Columbia University in New York on 116th and Broadway. And I thought, I'm in the middle of everything. It's just music and New York, and I didn't want to go to NEC, and I didn't want to go to Eastman, or Northwestern. Got into everywhere, but decided not to go.
Yeah. And
Barnard is a very small campus in the middle of New York. It's a little oasis, and I was always a little bit like, I wish I got into Columbia, and some of my friends did, and it was like you had to call in to register for your classes. But for me, I would go talk to the registrar. Right. And it was just that little bit more of hand-holding that I needed. Mm-hmm. So I felt very safe there, and there were a lot of people doing their own thing. Right. So I ended up being a political science major.
Which is incredible. How did that even wind its way in?
Well, it was like the least amount of credits, but I was fascinated by it. And a music minor, because I could not ever find a piano to practice. And that was the last thing you needed to make it a major. So I ended up getting a music minor. So all the music was at Columbia. And I studied with Alan Cave my freshman year, and the joint thing with Juilliard wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be, but Manhattan School of Music did have a joint lesson program that was a little bit more fleshed out. So I ended up switching to Ricardo Morales my sophomore, junior, and senior years, and he wanted me to play double lip.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was like, because he really used it as a tool. But he's like, you got to play double lip. You got to do it. You got to do it. And I was like, no. And then he sent me to David Weber. And he kind of knew about David Weber from Todd Levy, who had been subbing at the Met. And was like, you gotta find out what David Weber's teaching. I want to know. Yeah. Come back and report back. Yeah. And so David played double lip, or Mr. Weber. I never called him David in my entire life, or his. And he played double lip because his first teacher in Lithuania was an oboist.
Ah.
So the approach was very different.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he just didn't know anything different, and he played standing up with double lip and never had a problem with it. And I just think it's such a physical attribute of your mouth and your lips and what you can stand. And so he never advocated for it either. So I could go back to Ricardo and say no.
No. David says no.
David says no. Mr. Webb says no.
So tell me a little bit about him, because we all know him as the pedagogue and kind of the clarinet grandpa, but did he play an orchestra? What was his history before he became this genius teacher?
Ricardo and Todd and I actually ended up interviewing him, and there is an article in the Clarinet magazine.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
we need to get that.
We have to get that because we did sit at this restaurant that's no longer there called Docks on like 84th and Broadway or something, 86th and Broadway, which he loved. And we did interview him. So he was born in Lithuania and came to this country, and I'm a little rusty on his lineage, but essentially he knew Bernard. He came to New York. He ended up subbing in the Philharmonic with Bernard, I believe, and so he kind of considers Bernard a teacher, considered him a teacher of his. And he played in the Metropolitan Opera for 3 or 4 years during World War II. So like 1942 to 44 he played. And back then the way they did it, it was like you do all the German opera.
Oh,
And the other guy did all the Italian. And it kind of makes sense if you listen to David's sound and any old recordings. He really did have this like juicy, meaty, like really rich tone that he was really known for.
Right.
And you can get some of these little snippets of things. One of his favorite stories was playing, I think, in the New York Philharmonic, and Todd Levy will correct me, I'm sure, Todd. But I believe the story went that they were playing Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, and Bernard might have been having a little teeny bit of a problem with the presto solo, and then like asked David to play it, and then he played it, and Bernard's like, David gets it, you know. It was like this like lovely community, but yeah, it was. That was, you know, one of his stories. So after that, then he ended up being in New York City Ballet for many, 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 many years. And he taught at Juilliard with Leon Rushinoff, and they, of course, never got along ever. But they were quite famous in their kind of schools of playing. They were very different. And he could be a very difficult teacher. He wanted it done his way. And so when I went to study with him, I was playing on a LeBlanc and a Johnston mouthpiece. And he was like, just throw all that stuff away and put me on an R13 and a 5 lyre. And I was really reticent to do that because I had this concept of sound. But I'm so glad he did that in a certain way because it made me not care about equipment. I had to just make sound on the most basic equipment. And I consider him the person who polished my playing. It was 3-hour lessons, come at 9 a.m. He had an apartment on 86 in West End. And his wife was almost always around. She was lovely. And it would be long tones. And then it would be every scale, and then it would be minor scales, and then possibly you'd get to an etude. Then he would pick out from the Bernard orchestral excerpt book any of those, and you would do that. And then he would also play along with the long tones. And cool. He could play so loud. I mean, by the time I got through the long tones, I was exhausted and sweating, you know.
Awesome.
It was a workout. And you know, he would kind of lean over and like poke me and be like, more air, you know, and, you know, he would talk about embouchure, and he had his things. He had all of his points that he would hit along the way. And then it was like, okay, we're done. Let's go for lunch. And we would walk over to Barney Greengrass, and the guys there would be super rude to him. They knew him. And we would sit there and he would complain, and, you know, and we'd have this lovely lunch. And that would be that. And I did it. I ended up graduating from Barnard about a semester early. And so I had time. So I would go twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. He'd be like, come back.
How
And
fortunate.
yeah, it was incredible, the amount of time. So I ended up taking a year off after I graduated because I didn't feel ready. I kind of knew, okay, no, I'm here. This is all I really
clearly
want to
doing
do.
this.
Yeah. And I didn't go to a conservatory, so I was a little insecure about that, feeling like I need to catch up. And, when I was in the Barnard Manhattan School program, it was lessons, and Ricardo had me do seating auditions, and I ended up doing well in that, so I could also do their orc rep class.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, which was a clarinet orc rep class,
Right.
not the whole wind section. So I did get a lot of exposure there, but I wanted to play an orchestra. And Ricardo kept saying to me, all you need to do is sit in a room and practice. That's it. You played everything in high school. You had this amazing youth high school orchestra program. You don't need that. You need to sit in a room and practice. And it was really frustrating because I just wanted the glory of playing. Yeah. And
the moments.
Yeah, but he was right. I just needed to learn the clarinet. And when I went to Ricardo, my first lesson, I played this etude, and he'll never let me live down the etude, how horribly I played it. And he basically laughed in my face and was like, come back next week. It's going to be a lot of work.
We got some work to do here.
Yeah. God. Get this book. Opperman, Perez scales. And I hadn't really considered, to me, scales were things to be feared. Like,
right.
Oh, I'm going to play a wrong note. And so therefore I was playing wrong notes in music. Mm-hmm. And what Ricardo did instantly was make scales the foundation of music.
Right.
So without
where they're
that,
supposed to be.
Right. I wasn't going to, really get anywhere. And so I spent a year just doing scales, and then taking that scale for that week and putting it, in the Berriman book, but he made me get the David Height book. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's a key that has thirds and it has fourths and it has these like little permutations.
Right.
And then he made me do Krebs,
right.
which was like a more melodic version of that key. And then things started to click for me. It was like,
right.
Oh, okay. So he also made me do a lot of Opperman. And that was really a key for me. And so interestingly, when I went to Mr. Weber, he knew Cal, and they approached clarinet very differently, but it was also very similar in that for David, it was all about air. And if you had air, your fingers are going to do whatever they're going to do. But Opperman was all about the technical aspect of things. And so for me, it was like putting them together. All of a sudden, the air made sense because I really didn't have the air. That was what was lacking for me.
Right.
So putting that together was just like an explosion for me. So
right, and then it clicks, and then music makes sense because it's all the patterns, and then you have the whole monster thing. And I think the air is such a tricky one because people just shout about the air, but there's not a lot of description on what exactly that means and how to do it. So getting to do those long tones with somebody who's playing with you, so you can hear the air.
Yeah.
That's a huge, amazing opportunity.
And then you're getting poked.
Play
louder.
More, really.
Prodded. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that was the polish for me. When the Met position came open, I was still playing for Mr. Weber, and I played for him once. And I remember playing Louisa Miller, and he was like, well, you like if you don't win, I don't know what wins. And I was like, oh my God,
That's awesome.
And then I did win the job, and he told me later, a lot of people were like, well, who is this girl? Where'd she come from? How is this possible? And probably a lot of other negative things. But he said, well, she just sat in a room and practiced.
She did the work.
She did the work.
This is what happens. And she listened. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that boring, ugly work of long tones and scales.
Yeah, it's hard to be alone. It's hard to be alone for that long.
Yeah. So tell us about the process of the audition, because the Met is so unique with their whole idea behind it. now that you've been there for so long, you've been on the other side of the screen, I'm sure, many times. And so tell us about your experience doing the audition, and then when you are listening to auditions, what kind of makes it different from the other orchestras?
Well, first, our process is supposedly, and I think it is, one of the fairest processes in the country. We have a screen up every round, and the committee does not know who the winner is. It's a number until after we voted that they've won the job. So you can read about our audition process in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink.
Awesome.
It's towards the end, and he talks about how all of a sudden Julie Landsman was one of the first female brass players,
right?
Our principal horn player for many years, fantastic horn player. And when it was a woman who came out from behind the screen, it was like, huh? Okay. So that really changed the industry, and I think that's just been our process for a long time. And so Steve Williamson and I had been subbing at the Met. We had Ricardo had split up the work between the two of us. He didn't want either one of us to get overwhelmed with subbing because he knew there would be an audition. So it was like, keep practicing and sub a little bit and get some experience. And I had gotten into DePaul to study with Larry, and I was really excited to do that. And Larry was like, just stay in New York. You're never going to get an opportunity to sub like that, and you can come out and take some lessons with me. So then I eventually had another year off where I wasn't going to DePaul, but I knew I could eventually. And so I would take this experience and sub at the Met. And I got to play, Rosencavalier, and Steve played Lulu, and he did Don Giovanni Stage Band, and I did something else, and maybe Nabucco, something like that. So we both got some really great experience. And in the meantime, I was intensely preparing for this audition. And that involved a lot of things. One was the mental aspect. Two was just learning that music. I didn't know any of it. And three was also my body, in a way. I was like working out and really like running and kind of like dealing with the physical aspect of my body. So the mental aspect of things was that I knew I would be extraordinarily nervous. And, as you get older, you realize you get nervous because you really want it bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, ah. So both of my parents are Buddhists. And they kind of understood intrinsically that the process of meditation, or just like being alone with your thoughts and your mind and quieting that, is integral to being able to be, at least for me, to be in a space where you can perform at your best, get into that zone. So we had a very good family friend of ours who was a nurse in Boston, and she also did some hypnotherapy. So she made this tape for me, which basically was very similar. She did it for a lot of sports competitions, like ice skaters and things like that, where she's mentally taking you through the day. And so she would say, you've woken up this morning, it's a beautiful day, and you're going to do this like, deep breathing thing, and then you're going to get your clarinet and walk to the Met, and you're going to get your clarinet out. And so she basically walked you through the day, which at that time I couldn't even imagine getting to the Met.
Right.
So it was
panic.
Yeah, just panic, blackout.
Yeah.
So it was like, you walk into the room, you're going to play these excerpts, you play them well, you have fleet technique, and you're joyful. And that's a key thing for me, was joyful. Like, why are you doing this?
Right.
If not for joy? So that was really, really helpful for me. And basically the day went like that. I had
so awesome.
I had played, Ricardo let everybody play for him once before the auditions. So my time to play for him was like at 11 o'clock 2 nights before. And he was like, no, this sounds terrible. Is that your only read?
And you're like,
yeah. My claim to fame was I never cried in a lesson. So, according to him. And so I think I just sat there after a minute and was like, is there anything nice you can say?
Yeah.
And he was like, if you want somebody to say something nice, go play for your grandmother. I was like, okay, holding back tears, biting my tongue, leaving now. But my reads were really bad. And the audition day, it was hot and humid. And all of a sudden my reed just bulked up enough to be good. And I remember what I ate. I remember walking over there. I remember warming up. I remember walking to the room. I remember playing everything and just being right in my body.
It's just so amazing.
It was. Steve and I had both been auto-advanced, and then he and I were the only ones in the finals.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So
how did you manage the excitement nerves of getting into the finals and managing the finals without being too excited? That, it's every time you get through, it gets more exciting and also more stressful because now you could almost get it.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I was in shock that I passed. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, okay, and there wasn't that much time because we didn't end up playing a concerto. So it was like, we're going to start right away. And so in a way that was good. I remember I had a bar, ate the bar, and I think Steve went before me. He might have been 2 and I was 3, which is my lucky number. So it was going to work out. Yeah. Forever. And then, I think we played almost everything again, and it just
did it, right?
Yeah, it just all went as it needed to go. And when the personal manager came and told me I won, I was so shocked, and my first reaction was, Steve has kids. Notice to your readers, he won principal a couple of years later and is now principal in Chicago Symphony. So he was just fine.
Yeah.
But I was just in disbelief.
Wow.
And later that day, Michael Parloff, who was our principal flute player at the time, was like, people will think we hired a sub today, but we all know how great you played.
Wow.
And that was really special and important.
Sweet.
Because, people don't always realize how, the screen is there. We don't really know who you are. And that's an important thing for us. It's a really point of pride. And having been now, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 auditions on the other side, there's just always somebody who stands out who just has that day.
Yeah.
And it's pretty incredible. Somebody who does every single thing that's written on the page, but also makes it 3-dimensional.
Right.
Brings it to life. They hit all the markers, as loud as they possibly can, as soft as they possibly can throughout the list of excerpts that they play.
Right.
They have a plan. For us, it doesn't necessarily have to be our perfect style, but there's enough of our recordings out there that you can listen to some of our tempi and you can listen to how we might play that short or something.
Right.
But that's generally, we're looking for a great musician.
Right.
And that's the one thing I do love about my colleagues. I think we're always looking for a great musician, and somebody who may not necessarily play the same style as us. We might ask them to play it again. And I always tell my students this, that's not the kiss of death. We're saying to you, we want you to play it again. We want to hear more. If we didn't, we would say thanks, next.
Right.
So don't freak out. Really listen to why we're asking you to play again. And try to keep the nerves in check and go, oh, okay, yeah, they're giving me another shot to really do it better. Or they want to see if I'm flexible. They want to know, could I play in your style? And I think that's really key. People start to freak out. we also will absolutely let anybody play something again. You know, if I had a nickel for every Barber Seville that started over, great, no problem. You know, we're here. It's not a big deal.
That's really a good thing to know. I feel like a lot of people would be terrified to take a second stab at it.
I think if it's just, I feel like we're compassionate. And again, I'm speaking for myself, but I mean, for me, it's like if you, and then you start it again and you rock it, great. You know, I might note like started it again, like, okay, maybe I want to make sure you're consistent. But if that's the only thing and everything else is perfect, I'm probably going to pass you to the next round, especially if it's a preliminary. So, I mean, I think we're generous in that way.
Yeah, but it's good, and everyone's a human.
Yeah. I mean, we just don't have the tradition of wanting you to not do well.
Right.
We want you to do well.
Another aspect to your experience is teaching. You teach at Rutgers and also at Verbier. How many summers have you been there?
Verbier, I started in 2014.
Wow.
And that's an incredible place. I mean, you're just, first of all, in the mountains amongst the gods, and it's incredible, the Swiss Alps. It's a beautiful place. The festival is the brainchild of Martin Engstrom, who was at Deutsche Grammophon for many years, who knows everybody in the business, and he is a wonderful, wonderful visionary. And his vision there is that pre-professional students from all over the world come and play in this festival orchestra, which will have a professional conductor, like Gergiev is there, and Noceda is there, Fabio Luisi, and great singers or great soloists. And a lot of these younger musicians are either just about to win a job, have just won a job, are taking auditions, you know, doing really, really well. And they may not have a ton of ensemble experience. So the Met Orchestra coaches are there. We don't play with them. It's a little bit different than PMF. Sometimes I'll play if there's, especially for clarinet, there's like another spot that could be filled. And so sometimes I'll play, but generally we're conducting and coaching them on ensemble practices, best practices for like tuning and listening and playing together and chords and things like that, balance. And they just may not have had the time to really focus on that kind of thing. I find it so interesting when I get there, the Americans versus the Europeans.
Yeah,
Europeans are like, outward, extroverted soloists, but their sound may not be what we're used to, and the Americans are usually very in the box and careful, and like my teacher told me to do it this way. So I've learned so much score preparation and conducting, which has helped my own playing. When I started in 2014 coaching there, I was playing principal. I was acting principal at the Met. So that helped me tremendously as a principal player.
Absolutely.
And I do teach at Rutgers. I think I started in 2009 or 10. I'm not sure. And I generally have 4 or 5 students there. You know, it's a really intimate experience to teach somebody for an hour a week, and it's a lot of psychology, how to practice. And I just had lunch with a former student of mine who, you know, it was just so fun to see where he is and see where he's gone. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's great. A huge piece of that. And kind of thinking back to Mr. Weber, there's a part of the pedagogy that does turn into a really beautiful relationship that you have as your students grow, and they become so proud of you to watch you go and do your thing. So it's a special thing we have in music.
Oh my gosh.
To get to spend time with people like that.
Yeah. I mean, those relationships are key. And I mean, basically the question in students' mind is always like, can I do it? And they want you to answer that. And it's like, I don't know. Can you?
Yeah.
Will you?
Right.
What do you think?
Right.
And so much of it is about building their confidence and teaching them the tools that they need to do it on their own. And so I find like with freshmen, it's just long tones until they just literally can't stand it anymore.
Yeah.
And then we start to build in other things. You know, obviously they've been doing scales, but I approach it very much like Ricardo and Mr. Weber, where it's scales and that's the building blocks of everything. And so they don't really get that. And once they start to get that, then it's their freshman year, they're just literally like 2 weeks before I'm giving them a piece to do their jury.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I don't believe in bringing the piano in every day, not every lesson, not even until junior year. And even then I don't do that.
Right.
Because it's just so little time to literally teach them how to play the clarinet.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if they can't play the clarinet, they're not going to be able to play it in tune. So why even bring the piano in and just drive me crazy with their bad pitch? So we got to figure out the bad pitch.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's just clarinet stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just taking their clarinet and tuning it, or I'm giving them a different piece of equipment to try this. So, and to make it fit for them, like how they play, I'm pushing what they need. And it's usually custom tailored for where they are. And I certainly understand the pedagogical aspects of like, this you need this week, this you need this, you know, and I certainly pay attention to all of that stuff. But I've had people come in and just play Stravinsky 3 pieces great their freshman year, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that one's done, you know. Yeah. How about some Brahms? Yeah. Exactly. So, but yeah, it's a beautiful relationship where they grow and learn. And
Absolutely. And so that's a perfect segue to, what is your advice for this age group, the college, post-college? Now that the platform has changed, everything is so different. You've seen it transform in front of your eyes in the city, I'm sure. How do people go out and start getting gigs? Like it seems like the days of, well, Ricardo split the load between me and, you know, that's kind of gone. It's not quite as easy as that anymore. So what would you suggest for people to think about as they're trying to get out there?
That's an amazing question. And Mr. Weber had a whole studio of amazing clarinet players: John Manassi, Dan Gilbert, Todd Levy. And Todd was the first person to give me gigs, probably because Mr. Weber told him to do it, you know, but somehow it was like I was on his radar. And Todd is just that kind of guy. And he still does that. Like, students of his that really demonstrate capability are going to get to do some gigs and really get that experience.
Right.
And that's part of the school of playing.
Right.
And the studio school from Mr. Weber, I think that was handed down in the Bonad and the lineage.
Right.
And that's what's so important. We have to carry that forward.
Right.
It isn't as strong now. I think it's sad there aren't as many like freelance things. And so some freelance work has shriveled up. There aren't as many. We're not as willing to take risks for students. But I also think there is a plethora of summer things. And really, for me, I remember playing with Todd and just being scaredless, basically, to be honest. What really was great for me was I got to play in Steve Williamson's woodwind quintet for a summer.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
That was just, I mean, these girls were amazing. Keve Wilson, Kiki Larson, Kiki and Sue Larson. And we toured all over. We were in Texas and we were in California, and we did a ton of concerts. And that, for me, was the polishing of the professional aspect of stuff.
Wow.
So shout out to you ladies, because we had a great time, and I learned so much from them. And it was all girls, and it was just like so much girl power. And I remember we did a concert on the top of a hill in Central Coast, California, near San Luis Obispo, and we played like Shostakovich string quartet, a transcription. Whoa. And we had done like Midsummer Night's Dream. We did Barbara Summer music. We did this Shostakovich, and it was just so hot. But it was, I think we did Paquito's piece.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it just like all clicked for me, and we were performing.
Yes.
And for me, it was like from that moment on, it was like, this is for wind players, this is the key. This is the key component. You have to be able to play in a woodwind quintet.
Yep. And
you have to be able to tune, and you have to be able to listen and have this relationship with people without a conductor.
Right.
And until you can do that, so I often will tell people, don't worry about playing in an orchestra. Try to do chamber music. Try to do a lot of chamber music. And you're going to start to like make your own ideas and start to sing and do something really interesting and say something, right? Because I find with my students, they're like, is this right? Did I do this excerpt right? And I'm like, what do you think?
Yes.
So say something. So that's my first piece of advice.
Yes.
That's just like get your friends and do it and put on performances free in a church. And it's hard. You have to bust your butt. The other thing that I think is important is to play for other professional clarinet players and just get like, people are like, oh, I don't know what I'll play. Well, who cares? Why are you paying us if not to help you learn something? So don't come with something perfect because then we're going to go, oh, why are you playing for me? Yeah. So bring something that you're struggling with, bring something that shows your capability, bring something that you can do well, bring it all. And get a lot of input because also you're getting your name out there. And then somebody might go, oh, I really need somebody to play third clarinet on this thing. And that person was pretty good, So
great advice.
Yeah, you gotta network. I'm learning this. So, from other industries, you really have to get a name for yourself and people need to know you exist. And as we all get older, there are more people coming in and then people they leave town. So Steve and I got an opportunity because Todd won Milwaukee Symphony.
Right.
And he wasn't in New York anymore. So you just never know. Part of it is the school that you play in, the style, the sound. So when I ask my kids, well, who did you listen to on YouTube? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, well, go back and figure it out.
Exactly.
Come back and tell me who.
Exactly.
When I was a student, I was like, ripping off Columbia Music Company or whatever, BMG, to buy all these CDs. And now you have it for free. But think about that for a second, because if you want to be a musician and you want to be paid to do it and you're stealing and listening to music for free, what does that say? That's my biggest beef.
Yes.
So, and then if you like that, what do you like about it? And maybe you go figure out their lineage and maybe you go figure out their community and what you can do to talk to them about what they're doing.
Yes.
So I think that's really important. A lot of people say to me, yeah, but they didn't return my email. So call them, pester them. I'm of the opinion that the person who is like, say good things, don't say anything mean, really consider your attitude. It's not that like you have to be super positive, but it's like in the sort of like the Buddhist scheme of things, like wherever you go, there you are. Like you need to be in the present moment, and a failure isn't a failure.
Right.
So when I was in high school in the Youth Philharmonic Orchestra and Ben Zander was conducting, we went on tour to South America and they followed 4 kids around. And I was one of them. And I didn't even really know it at the time, but I played a wrong note in Dvorak New World Symphony. Yes. And I just, I just couldn't believe it. And they filmed me in the corner, like sulking. And then, they interviewed Ben Zander and he's like, well, Jessica played L'Histoire this day and we traveled this day and they're tired and, mistakes can happen. And you really need to have a personal relationship with failure. And I was like watching this and I was like, I'm going to go die of shame. And my mom was like, this is so wonderful. What a wonderful learning thing. And in a way, moms are always right. Yeah. My mom is a brilliant person who knows everything. So it's true. I think you do have to say, why is the word failure such a bad word? It isn't. Like any failure that you have is going to propel you to do something else if you do it.
If you take it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it's all part of your path. You are where you're supposed to be at any given moment because you control your path. And so, yeah, that didn't work. Okay, what can we learn from this? And how can we make this better? How can we make lemonade out of these lemons, or what are we going to do with this rotten lemon? You just have to analyze it a little bit less personally, but you have to have that motivating factor of you're going to carry yourself along your path. And I think that's probably the best thing I can say is ask yourself, where do you want to be in 5 years? What would your 5-year future self tell yourself right now? What would your 10-year future self tell yourself right now? What do you need to do today to make that 5-year and 10-year self happy? What do you need to do to prepare? One of the things that Ricardo told me was, he would call at 11 a.m. and be like, what are you doing? I'm like, I just woke up. And he's like, oh my God, if there had been we needed a sub, you would have to be up at 8 a.m. You would have to be warmed up. You'd have to get downtown to the Met. It takes 40 minutes on the train. What are you going to do? And I was like, oh my God.
I guess I'm not playing today.
So, I started to be up at 8 a.m. and warm up. And I did get a call from my first gig at the Met. It was 11 o'clock at night to sub as second clarinet on the full dress of Lady Macbeth of Mustangs.
At 11 o'clock at night? Mm-hmm. That's insanity.
Mm-hmm. Because Sean Osborne's had a family emergency, and that was that. I had to go in and play. And Gergiev was conducting. And I had just found out that I did not get into Juilliard for my master's. And Elaine Duvas was like, how did that happen? Because you just rocked this.
Yeah.
And Gergiev came up to me and congratulated me. And again, it was just scales.
Wow.
It was scales.
Play your scales,
I know,
everyone.
finger exercises. Get the upper end.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. This has been so fabulous.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Check out InsideTheNotes.com for videos and more information on our guests. Follow Inside the Notes podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to receive more information on our next guests.